Welcome, everybody. And your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, co-founder of sumApp and Greater Than the Sum. And Tim Hansen is with us. He's not hosting today, but he's with us, waving his hands at you. He's my partner, co-founder of sumApp and Greater Than the Sum. And we also have Kara Martner, who is our support person, and she'll be doing tech support today. So if you, so she will be putting things, lots of things in the chat, links and stuff. And if you have any technical issues, feel free to direct message her. And she'll also be keeping an eye on the questions, since I don't always watch those while I'm presenting. And if she feels like something needs to be addressed right away, she will interrupt me. So for those of you who are new to this, or who it's useful to have a reminder, today is our deep dive session, which is the third session in our monthly cycle of 3 community practice sessions. The first session every month happens on the second Monday. It's an on-ramp session, which is really the best introduction to social system mapping that you can get in a group session. We usually have, we always have a member of our mapping network present one of their social system maps and let people ask questions. So if you haven't ever seen a social system map, this is a really great way to get to walk through one with somebody. It's also really great, those of us who are mappers and do this regularly love to get a chance to see each other's maps, as well as to just connect with one another. So intro session, on-ramp, second Monday of the month. And the next coming up one will be on November 9th. And Sarah Shanahan will be sharing the REAMP social system map. This is our second monthly session, which happens on the third Monday of the month, which is a deep dive conversation. This session assumes that you've had some kind of introduction to social system mapping. And what we do in this session is usually dig deeper into a specific topic related to social system mapping that has emerged out of either our on-ramp sessions or just conversations that are going on in the community. If you're, oops, that should not be happening. Excuse me. If you are not familiar with what a social system map is, you're absolutely welcome to stick around, and we'll give you an opportunity to poke into a couple in a little bit. But just know that the content today sort of assumes a little bit of prior knowledge. And but again, love to have you stick around if it's interesting to you. So today's session is using data visualization concepts to inform our social system map design. Then the fourth Monday of the month, we have a tech talk session, which is usually about a feature of sumApp that we feel like that's either a brand new feature that we're rolling out, or a feature that isn't, we think could be more widely used and just needs a better introduction, or we do something around Kumu, the technical aspects of working in Kumu with social system mapping. And this month, the next one coming up is October 26th. And the topic is going to be open, but we're going to use liberating structures formats to help to hopefully generate some more discussion amongst mappers. Okay, so if this is, if you're looking to learn more, there's a few ways you can do that, and Kara will be putting links into the chat right now, or she already has. One of which is you can be on our community's community practice social system map. There's a link to an on-ramp that Kara just put in. They're not an on-ramp, an opt-in form. You fill in the opt-in form, it will put you on the map. And that's one of the best ways of getting familiar with what a social system map is, because you'll walk through it, the process as an end user, and then you'll have access to that map right away. And you can poke around in that map, and you can also use it to to pull code as an example for your own maps. Another option is to join our Slack team. We encourage everybody to do that who's interested in this. And there's also an invitation to the Slack team in the chat. And check out our knowledge base, where we have lots of articles about social system mapping and documentation of sumApp and a little bit about Kumu. And then lastly, if you are, hang on, stuck or just, also on the knowledge base, there are recordings of recent sessions. So if you haven't been to an on-ramp and seen a social system map, I suggest you go and check some of those out. And they also have recent topics that we've talked about. So those can be useful to you. And then lastly, if you're stuck or confused, or you just need to ask a couple quick questions, I devote a half an hour every week, Thursdays from 5 to 5:30 on from Central Time. I'm just on Zoom, and anybody who wants to who has access to the Zoom link, which you can get in the Slack team, can just pop on and ask me your questions. And it's great if a couple people pop on and we can have a conversation. If I need to cancel, I'll cancel in Slack. Okay, so today's agenda, we're gonna do some introductions in our chat in just a moment. I'm gonna do some very high level, brief overview of some data visualization basics for us to think about, and then we're gonna do some breakouts and have you talk about what you've seen, what the data visualization principles relative to the maps that you've seen. And then hopefully we'll have time after that to have you come back and share with us in the chat what you've learned. So, and for those of you who aren't familiar, we also, the formal session is scheduled for an hour, so we will be together for an hour. We will also, at the top of the hour, we also stick around for an extra half hour for informal conversation or more question and answers. So if you want to stick around, just wait for us to say goodbye to everybody at the top of the hour, but don't leave, and then you'll still be in the Zoom, and then we'll carry on the conversation. One other thing I wanted to bring up was, before we go to the breakouts, it sometimes happens, and if this has happened to you right now, this is great. I mean, it's not an issue, but it sometimes happens that you show up for one of these sessions and you realize this is a little too advanced for me, or it's a little too basic for me. It's just not what I need to be thinking about today. Whatever that is, that's great. We're glad you came, and we hope you'll come back when it is more appropriate. But if you want to jump out, what most people do is they wait until the moment when Kara splits everybody into breakout rooms, and then they just don't go to a breakout room and they jump off Zoom at that time. So we all honor your agency and using the rule of 2 feet. But what that does to the people who stick around is, like, well, we could have 2 or 3 people in their own private, all alone in a breakout room with nobody there, and then it takes Kara several minutes to sort of see who's going where and what's happening, and then recombine people and explain it. And by the time she's done all that, the breakout time has eaten into significantly. So if you want to jump off, that's great, and we'll stop right before we do the breakouts and invite you to question yourself and decide if you're going to stick around or not, and then leave before we break us up. Okay, so that's enough housekeeping. So let's start with our chat intros, and go ahead in the chat, put your name, your pronoun, and your location. And I'm going to so we have some Minnesotans as usual. We have Pedro from Mexico, Portland, Calgary, Munich, another Portland, or is that the same? No, 2 Portlands. Okay, it's always just really fun to see where people are. New Jersey, where people are calling in from. Okay, second or third thing to put in the chat is, this is just really a question. What do you find most confusing? What do you personally find most confusing when you're first looking at a social system map? And or if you're someone who's really comfortable in social system maps, what's the biggest visual challenge that you observe other people having when they're first introduced to a social system map? So either from your perspective or what you observe of others. What's the biggest visual, not the biggest conceptual challenge, but just the biggest visual challenge, if you can make that distinction, and if you see one. So if you could put that into the chat. So I'm seeing lots of lines, spaghetti, yep. What's clickable? 2 connection lines, too many things. There's no clear hierarchy. That is absolutely the case. Tracking a constellation within the map. Oh, and viewing on small screens is sometimes difficult to read. Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, then let's go to the last question, which is, what are you personally hoping to take away from this session? And then Emily, what can be searched? It's another good question. So takeaways, hoped for takeaways in the chat. Okay, next steps, new insights, ideas for future projects, hoping how to apply Kumu to sumApp. Great. Okay, so let's jump in then to the main topic. So I'm trying to use this pointer thing, which is actually making it harder for me to think. Kara, so for starters, for those of you who will find this useful, Kara is going to put links to 3 different social system maps that are public and publicly viewable. And you can, so if it helps you to look at a map and as you're applying some of these principles to sort of have them both in mind, go ahead and select on any of those maps or all 3 of them, however you want to do it. As well as if you have a map of your own, it might be useful to open that up and use these as a reference also. Which oh, and lastly, Kara, did you put the if you haven't, or would you do it again if you did, the handout for today's session into the chat so that people have the reference of the principles to return to later. Okay, so we're going to talk about pre-attentive visual properties, which is a really useful thing to know and think about. It is kind of the core of everything. If that's all you take away, that will be make a big difference. Then the Schneiderman Mantra, and lastly, just a little bit about it being a visual language. So pre-attentive visual properties are properties in the visual field that grab your attention, whether you're trying to pay attention to them or not, that we just, when we see it or when it enters our field of vision, it grabs us. So for instance, you know how when you're reading something online and suddenly there's that little, you know, some movement off in the side in your peripheral vision, and it's sort of, you know, it's usually it's often an ad with a video in it or some kind of movement in it, and it grabs your attention, it pulls you away from what you were trying to pay attention to. So knowing what those visual properties are is key to making a map that is key to being able to beginning to be intentional about how you use those visual properties for communicating. So, and I'm going to go to the next slide because they show up a little bit bigger, and you also have this in your handout. So there are visual properties related to form, which are length and width and orientation, size and shape and curvature, and enclosure and spatial grouping and blur. And if you notice all of these things in these little examples, you'll see that you can instantly, the exception just jumps out at you. And or the spacing just immediately tells you something. You may not know what the content is about, but you know that there's some kind of distinctions going on based on these groupings. And so it immediately is communicating with your brain, whether you anybody meant it to or not. Likewise, then there are pre-attentive visual properties related to color. You all know about, you know, like if you're looking at watching a movie and it's grayscale, it's black and white, and then there's like one little thing that's got some color to it. Immediately that grabs your attention, and immediately you know it's speaking something to you, and then your brain starts to say, why is that being called out? What's the point of that? Likewise, the intensity, if there's you know, a big difference in how strong the coloring is. Like in this one, it just grabs you immediately. And then position. So as you can see here, these are all in the same position two-dimensionally, and then this one is different. That one also grabs our attention. And then it's hard to see here, but this is direction. So that's like that one that I was talking about with the video ads in the side of our screen. So in a social system map in Kumu, oh no. So if we're thinking, so when we talk about those pre-attentive visual properties, we want to think about, we want to keep in mind that the more of them that you're using and the more variation that you're using amongst the different visual properties, the more demand you're putting on your viewer's attention, and the more you're making noise. So, which can turn into overwhelm really easily. So for instance, in these two boxes, we're using the visual property of spatial positioning. Right here we've got, so we see this is a distribution, we can tell that, and we can see this is the exact same distribution. So just so the positioning stays the same, but the coloring, so we're really essentially using two different pre-attentive visual properties, location and then color. So we're using color in both of them, but we're using color very differently in each of them. So in this one, immediately I can see, oh, there's something about those red rings that this visualization is drawing my attention to. It wants me to understand something about the red rings. I don't yet know what it wants me to understand, but I know that it's trying to tell me something about the red rings, and I can see them easily, and I can see that they're kind of easily or evenly distributed. And my brain is going to automatically start to dig into what's that about and try to parse it. And whereas in this one, if there's a story to be told about the red rings, it's hidden, for one thing, because it's very hard to figure out where they are. It's also very hard to understand what it is you want me to understand, because, okay, I see the distribution, but it's not at all clear to me what the colors, all these different colors are telling me. And if I have to take my eye and move it from the graphic to a key and back and forth, if I have to do that more than once to actually be able to retain the information to start to parse it, it becomes overwhelming. And most people will just sort of shut it out, and they'll just sort of say, I can't figure that out. It's too much work, I don't like this, and sort of shut down. So we want to think really hard about not just what properties are we using, but how are we using them? Are we using them, you know, in a way that is readable and starts to guide the brain, or are we using them in a way that is overwhelming and shuts the brain down? So yes, Jim, Tufte was one of my very first sources of thinking. I mean, that I have one of his books, and that was in my early data visualization thinking. Tufte was a big one. So in Kumu and in a social system map, there are only not all of these visual properties are available. So the ones that don't have a little shady box over them are the ones that we can use in social system mapping. The ones that have a black border around them are generally just not useful in a social system map because we don't have control over them, or they're not something that you can do in Kumu. And the ones with an orange border are ones that Kumu handles automatically using an algorithm. So you're not in control of those, but you want to also be thinking about how do those pre-attentive visual properties, how are those being impacted by and adding to the confusion of all the other properties that you're using. So that's pre-attentive visual properties. Move on to the Schneiderman Mantra. Schneiderman was another founder of data visualization, the field of data visualization, but but the Schneiderman Mantra is about when we're using interactive data visualization. So this mantra is not about static picture visualizations, but about interactive, where we can actually we have choices and things that we can do with the data, that the viewer can do with the data. So it's a very simple mantra: overview first, zoom and filter next, and then details on demand. So a lesson that Tim and I recently, well, about a year and a half ago, sort of aha moment that we had that fits into the Schneiderman Mantra was that we've been making these maps for several years, and in that process, we usually had a home view. Now in Kumu, we can have as many views as we want, and so often with a social system map, we're slicing and dicing the data in various different ways. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here. Okay, so we have these different views, and what we used to do was have the main view be the social network analysis view. So this would be the main, so the first thing people would see when they pop onto the map, open their map, was dots, all different colors, sometimes different colors of dots, sometimes different sizes of dots, plus all the lines, and it would just, like, immediately what I observed over and over was that, it just made people look a little nauseated. Like, it's too much. Plus everything's moving. It's going, so it was just too much. And we had this eye-opening moment about a year and a half ago when we realized we started doing things differently. And what we started to do was make the first view be as simple visually as we can possibly make it, but still have it be using our, in sumApp or in Kumu using sumApp data, which is just a visualization of all the people in the network. So that's the overview, is just the persons. They're all the same color. They're all the same size. There's no connection. So we're not adding lines, and we're not causing any kind of positioning to happen. So that there's just a nice spread out, evenly spread out circle of faces. And we've discovered that that is just much easier for especially new people to begin to look at. They can just think about dots, clicking on the dots. We have some filters, and then so they can start to zoom in or they can start to filter, but we're keeping it as simple as possible. And then we use the Schneiderman Mantra not only within a given view, but within the sequence of views as well. So that first view is really simple, and then the next view has the people plus the offers and asks usually, and then the next view has the connections, so that they can gradually get used to one more visual concept as they go down the side panel. And it makes it much easier to teach people as well if you're walking them through it. Here's a couple things you do on this view, and then we move to the next, and then we move to the next, so that they're sort of accumulating their layers of understanding. So between the pre-attentive visual properties and the Schneiderman Mantra, putting those two together, I think will really help make our maps more easier to read. And then, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Oops. And then the last thing I wanted to talk, up. Oh, where did I lost something? I lost a slide. Uh-oh. Okay. I'm just going by memory now, which is fine. So the last thing I was going to talk about or just mention was that, so we're using, these are sort of like the vowels and the consonants, or, the foreign parts of speech, these pre-attentive visual properties. And then the Schneiderman Mantra is sort of like a way of structuring your whole communication. And the point, the biggest point that I want to make is that what we're trying to do when we're doing a social system map is we're trying to communicate first. So something being beautiful is important and valuable because it draws people in, but beauty has to come second and communication has to come first. And so when we're decorating our maps, it's really important to ask ourselves, am I doing this because I can, or am I doing this because it's meaningful and communicative? So that's one thing. And then in order to communicate, another principle is to be as consistent as possible. So for instance, in Tim and I's, in our maps, we've developed some standards, one standard of which is that everything that when in any view we're in, the filters that filter the nodes, we always put in the upper left-hand corner of the map. So you always know you'll find the node filters up there. If there are connections on the page, the filters for the connections are always on the bottom right, so that you can start to see as you go from view to view, you can see what's like the things that are the same from view to view, you know, you can count on them and those are just part of the structure. And then the things that are different from view to view are what pull your attention in and you say, oh, this is, I see, this is something else is going on here. Another thing, another standard that Tim and I use is, and you can make your standards be whatever you want, but to start to have, especially within a given map, to have a consistency of placement and design logic. So another standard that Tim and I use is the people and the organizations, anything that has agency, the agency things on the map are always circles with Tim and I's maps. And the things that are non-agency things that are conceptual, or for instance, what state they live in, or what issues they're working on, or what their offers and asks are, or strategies they're using, any of those other things that aren't a person, those are always either squares or rectangles. So that you can start to, as you go through a map, you can start to see, oh, okay, I understand right away when I'm looking, when I'm looking at a difference between, if these are people and these are ideas that they're connected to. So I'm not confused by sometimes, often both of those conceptually different things are circles. It just adds to the confusion to not be able to distinguish and have a consistent distinguishing. Another thing a standard we have is our people nodes are always, all the people are the same color in most views, unless there's a meaning, a reason to color them differently. So for instance, if you color if you put all your people, if you put different colors on all the people based on a dimension, is that something that is so important in every context that you're going to keep that from view to view? Or is it, so for instance, when I say we keep ours the same from view to view, we like everybody's purple, and that's just from view to view, that's the thing. Until we're trying to understand something about the structure in relation to something about the characteristics of the individuals. So for instance, if we're trying to look at the centrality and the connectedness around some kind of identities or geographic locations, then we might color the nodes based on, say, if it's identities for a specific view. And in that view, we're saying, so you'll go, they're purple, they're purple, they're purple in every view. And then there's a view where they're different colored. And then immediately you're going to say, oh, this is about the differences between the people. Immediately you're going to sort of check in and wonder what that's about and start to think about that. But if in every single view there's different colors, you're pretty quickly going to just tune those colors out, and they're not going to mean as much to you anymore. So within the making it a language, consistency, communication, I think that was it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop yapping. I'm not sharing. So let's give a minute for questions. Tim's asking to show a map. I've put a map in. We put several maps for people to bounce around in, and I wanted to leave time to for people to talk, and didn't want to spend a lot of time looking at a map because I know everybody's looked at maps, but if they needed one, they have one. Is everybody okay with that, or does anybody feel strongly you need me to open one up?
I think it would be great if you just illustrated with your basic map what, exactly what you've done, but
hang on.
Even 30 seconds of going through that.
Okay, I will do that. Give me a second. So this is a map. If it would finish loading. Okay. Share my
You're not
screen.
sharing, no.
Yeah, getting there. Okay. Can everybody see my screen now? Okay. So here, this is the directory view. It's just the people. It's as simple as we can make it. And it's as equal, everybody looks as equally as and similar as we can make them so that we're not overwhelming people with meaningful content on this at their first glance. And then, you know, so zooming in terms of the Schneiderman mantra could mean things like zooming into a person. It could also mean things like filtering. So again, up here is the filters for the dots, technical expertise, etc. Then the next is another directory in this instance. Again, they're circles. These are the working groups within this map or the broader networks that people came to this working group from. Then we have, this is sort of a variation on offers and asks. This is interests and expertise. So here you can see these things in the middle are rectangles because that's an interest. It's not a person. It's not an actor or an agent in any way. It's a concept. Legend is always down here, and again, we are filtering by the circles and or the rectangles up here. We don't filter on connections in this view because it's a different concept. And then here now we have, so this is the view I used to subject people to. First thing, it's actually not quite as chaotic as we used to do because there are no different colors of the nodes still. They're still all the same color, and we're not sizing in this view by number of connections. But as you can see, again, same filters up here, and to the degree that there are some very high level dimensions, like usually there's 2 or 3 at least dimensions that we just always put on every view because those are the dimensions that people are going to continually be asking for. So those are always in the same order. If there's any ones that get swapped in and out because of the content of the view, those are at the bottom. And then just in terms of details on demand, this is a thing Tim likes to do, is to put, oh, we're hiding Glenn from that page. He puts little toggles that will enable us to do that details on demand thing. So it's not just thrown at us when we first look at the map, but it is something that we can turn off and on so that we don't have to be so we can get at it without being overwhelmed. And then again, like I said, strengths of connections are always being filtered down here. Even when we have, in this instance now, we have circles, but they're different colors because these are working groups and these are human beings. And so we're distinguishing there. But I'm going to stop there and say, so I'm going to look at, Ryan, mobile is just not a thing in terms of Kumu. I just don't think it's going to be a thing. And so any other questions, and feel free to unmute, especially if you've already put it up further and I've missed it. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you break out into sessions and chat a little bit. And I'm going to give you the questions in a moment. But I want to invite you now, if this is a point when you're feeling like, okay, this is not useful for me, or I've got what I need and I don't want to be part of a conversation, I want to jump off. I'm going to say, okay, if you're going, love you, see you next time. And if otherwise, I'm going to just count down to 3 and ask you to check out now, or you can wave or even unmute and say goodbye. But I'm going to assume that everybody, and we're going to hope that everybody after that countdown sticks around so that we're not abandoning anybody in a breakout room. So anyone else? Okay. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's do, Carol, let's put them into threesomes, and let's give them 10 minutes. But don't hit send yet. Just sort them yet. Put them in rooms and don't break them out yet. I want to share the just get rid of this and show the questions. Get rid of that. And these questions are also on the bottom of the handout. So if you have that, if at least one of you in a group has the handout, that will help. But I'd like you to spend 10 minutes, try and make sure everybody gets a chance to talk, but talk about what idea did you just hear that's new for you, or that perhaps you haven't implemented in your maps? And then so what does this one new idea suggest that you could incorporate into your mapping practice? And then now what? So what's one thing that you want to try or implement? Or if you're not the mapper, give feedback to the map designer about. So let's go ahead, Kara, and I'm gonna stop sharing and you can go ahead and break everybody out. So maybe we could just open up the conversation, and if there are things that you heard or came up with, you're a small enough group, just open it up, and I'd love to hear what people are thinking. And I apologize for cutting off the conversation early. Who's got thoughts?
Well, one question I had was regarding utilizing these tools for mapping problems in relationship to mapping individuals or organizations. And suggestions, are you finding that it sounds like you often use Kumu versus other types of mapping tools that can help to convey the relationship? So you may have it where organizations are attached to certain problems, but you're also trying to understand the complexity of those problems. So any suggestions on other tools that you found have been helpful to convey that information?
Yeah, there's a tool. So you're right. In terms of like surfacing the problems, or this sounds conceptually a little like creating a system map of understanding the relationships and the causes and effects amongst the problems. sumApp is a great next step from that, but that step of surfacing those in the first place. 7Vortex is a tool that is a collaboration online graph visualization tool that people can use from different locations. Kumu is good to use, not with sumApp, but just on its own. But the issue with Kumu is if you're in different locations, you're going to need a person to be inputting the information. Whereas with 7Vortex, anybody can be putting information in simultaneously. So, but then there's other tools like, those two are probably the best for your purposes, unless there's something anyone else knows of and uses.
I would throw into that as Christine said, once some issues are surfaced, like if there is a set of challenges that people are digging at, there's certainly one of the things that we've done is organizing people around those challenges. So it's finding the ways to visually represent what that challenge is, and even the one of the things that I found in Kumu is useful is what's the kind of scale of that challenge, even from a user's perspective. So how important is this as an answer, or how many people have connected themselves to this particular challenge is something that visually works out really well. We have a couple of maps that have used just the number of people who are identifying, kind of self-identifying as connected to that issue as a scale factor for the element of that kind of category, that challenge, and just being able to quickly look and say, oh look, housing equity is we say this is one of our big things that we're focusing on, but it turns out that there's only 3 people who actually identify with that issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else? Mapping tools or problem surfacing? Other questions or thoughts, Jim?
I just have appreciated the rigor with which you have brought this this thinking. So yes, I've seen this in the new maps that you've been doing, but to actually think about it very specifically about highlighting variation that you want people to make sense of makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Cool. Other questions or thoughts? Anyone? Raina.
For me, what I'm taking with me is in the beginning, I have been lured into trying to put too much into it, and with this, look what we can do with this. So with today, I'm getting a sense, yeah, keep it simple and have a strategy for leading the people who want to dive into it. So that's very, very helpful.
Yeah. 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 Ryan just put into the chat, don't be afraid of multiple maps. And you don't have to share them all. So you can have maps that have more information, even with the same data set. We've done this where we have a public facing map, but it doesn't show all the more private pieces of data. And then we have private maps and lots of views if they're meaningful, views that you can explain why each view exists, then don't hesitate to make more views. But yeah, that took us a while. I mean, Jim, the rigor that you're talking about, like, is I've always known these principles, but learning to use them took time because I like a lot of visual complexity and I just feel like people should get it, like I'm kind of obnoxious that way, but really watching over and over and over a bazillion people just sort of their eyes glaze over. Now being able to see their eyes, sort of open up a little more and a little more has really, it was important realization. So yeah, Jim.
A question and a comment. Ryan, when you said multiple maps, did you mean multiple maps or multiple views?
So both. I think that it's really understanding the difference between those two is a little bit like, I don't know that I could put a succinct, point on the difference, but my understanding is that that the maps represent different data sets, different projects, although there is a little bit of overlap in those. And then the views can take that data set and visualize it in any number of ways. And I think that from the public's perspective or from the client's perspective, what they're seeing in terms of views is like a new map a lot of times, not necessarily, because sometimes it's just filtering down what you're seeing. But sometimes it's like a totally different, picture of the larger set of data. And I think that I've spent a lot of time when I've been working with clients, like trying to talk through, okay, what is it that you need? Let's try something. Just prototype it, throw it out there, see if that's useful. And then we've had clients, and Christina, was going to say this, we were working with a community foundation, and they looked at the maps and they were able to come back and say, okay, this is the progression that we want to see. It's like, here's the introduction story, here's the complexification of it, and really they were kind of walking through some of the same things that you were just talking about, and it really did help the kind of public facing presentation of that. And it took them a while to get there, but they did eventually get there. And we had a lot of maps in that project. I mean, I think that there were a lot of views, a lot of different ways of looking at information. We played with geographic underlays, the whole thing. It was, we ended up using 4 of them. At the end of the day, that's what they published on their website, and that was fine. And that was useful to them.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. Anyone we haven't heard from have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I just have a question. So we're pretty early on to this. We've got a network of people. We're just trying to find ways to connect them, both visually, but also just sort of so it's more self-sustaining. We're facilitating the network, but we don't want to be the owners of the network. And so I'm curious with Kumu. I mean, I love the visual representations and the way people can access some of that data. Is there ways to connect with people? Like if someone were to connect to a shared interest or a shared problem or whatever the shared connection point is, are they able then to reach out to that individual by clicking links, or is that within the context of Kumu? Or
within the context of Kumu, they do have a plugin, a Disqus plugin. Disqus is a platform communication like for comments and stuff, but And I've seen people try to use the Disqus plugin. It has some shortcomings, one of which is that the Disqus platform itself is public. So even though the chats are happening in a private map and it looks like they're private, if somebody did go into the Disqus, the main Disqus platform and search, they could find, so your chats that are happening in, if the map is private, that are happening in a private map, that can be very misleading because they could be findable easily on a much more public, broadly used platform. So that's one downside to that. And the other downside to that is that it's really hard to track the back and forth conversations because every node can have, like you'll see inputs and then never be able to find them and reply. So I would not suggest using Disqus, but then that means that no, there isn't a way to use the map to actually do the reach out. So you'll need some other kind of a norm platform like Slack or something that people use.
And Tim, I think that last suggestion is a good one in terms of pulling people into a community, but also because you spoke to me a little bit about what your project is, that kind of public directory of like, I need to know who I can reach out to help me with this particular issue or whatever. I mean, we absolutely had, public employees posting their, public employee email addresses on these maps so that they can be, they can be reached, and phone numbers for that matter. It's when it's been coming down to services, people who really do want to be reached. I haven't hesitated to, have people include contact information on those, and we just make it clear that that's part of the purpose of this map.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to take a moment, just one quick moment to go back to, I saw in the chat a couple questions about there being so many connections on a map. And I just want to clarify that for those who don't understand how that works. If there's two nodes, let's say Jim Best and Christine Capra are two dots on the map and they know each other. The line, there will be, and there's likely to be two separate lines. One is me saying, reporting back on my relationship to Jim. So this is my opinion of my interpretation of our relationship, my experience of our relationship. And then Jim also is going to say his relationship to me. He's talking about how he feels about our relationship or how strongly he thinks it is. So that's two different two arrows going like that from fist to fist. And often people will say, can't we just average those? Or, it's really messy and isn't there a way to could we just take the average? And the fact is, no, it's not a very good idea to take the average, because suppose Jim hates me and says he hardly knows me at all and I love him. And I say, if we average it, it looks like then our feelings are mutual in the same neighborhood, but they could be very different. So, and so we don't do it for that reason. We don't do it for technical reasons because it would be really hard technically. And we also don't do it because of the paradigm that tells us, that it makes us assume that it enhances the idea that a relationship, and it's true that there is a relationship between us, which isn't either of us, but that it's subjective. So we just want to make that obvious and clear that yes, my feelings about this relationship could be very different from Jim's feelings about this relationship, or maybe they're the same, but that we each have our own experience of the relationship and it could be different. And so just having the two lines, even if they're identical, reminds us visually. I mean, this is when I think about visual communication, I'm thinking at that level of what are we doing? Are we making it simpler for what reason? And what does that imply about the nature of the universe? And to put it in one implies that we have the same relationship. So thanks, Ryan. Good to have you. So I just wanted to answer that question. There's a lot of reasons for the two, but those are some of them. But that's what they do represent. And it's the top of the hour. So what we're going to do is, if you want to stick around and ask more questions or have more conversations, please feel free to, but I'm going to ask all of us right now, what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody unmute, and I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And when I get to 1, we'll all say goodbye to each other and wish each other our day's greetings. This is sort of our closing tradition. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.
Hey.
Have a wonderful
Bis zum
day.
nächsten Mal.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.